Everyone that's on the call, just some housekeeping. First of all, welcome. And very big welcome to Rashid, who's here with me, and Chris, who's with me on the line. Very excited that the two of you are on our CDFP journeys, and Chris is right at the finish line as likely to be our first certified digital finance practitioner in the world. So we're incredibly excited for Chris and for everyone else that's on our CDFP journey. Some housekeeping rules, or a little bit about today's agenda. Chris is going to talk to us about the digital finance landscape in Jordan and what the latest is from Jordan, and maybe talk a little bit about JomoPay, which is something that we cover in the Leading Markets course as a case study for one of the leading digital finance markets in the world. And Rashid's going to talk to us specifically about the financial inclusion landscape within Bangladesh, also about what's been happening recently, and his feelings on OTC, which is something that we cover both in the mobile money courses at the Digital Frontiers Institute, as well as the Leading Market courses. If everyone is on mute, by the way, just so that we can get the right content out fast. But if you have any questions, there's two ways that you can ask questions. You can raise your hand, and I will unmute you and ask you to talk. Or you can post your questions in the comments box or the Q&A box, and I will get either Chris or Rashid to respond to those questions. This is all about you, the attendees. We're here for you and to share knowledge with you. So please don't be shy in asking as many questions as you like to keep the conversation going. We'll start off with Chris and Jordan, and for the first half of the call, and then in the second half of the call, we will move to Rashid and Bangladesh. Good, let's get going. The call is recorded. The call will be, the webinar will be posted on the Digital Frontiers media front ends, whether it's LinkedIn or in the classroom itself, as well as on our websites. So you're public now. Good. Chris, why don't we start off with giving us a little bit about you, your background, what you're up to, and yeah, how, for what reason would people engage with you?
Okay, well, hopefully there'll be lots of reasons why people engage with me, but hi everyone, and you find me in Malawi. Malawi is kind of my second home. I'm originally from UK, but I've been living in Malawi, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Jordan for the last 13 years. I essentially did a career change when I was 29, started from zero financially, professionally, and I came out to Malawi in 2007. And sort of since then, I've been mainly working as a freelance consultant in microfinance and digital financial services. Through those last 12, 13 years, I have had some longer term jobs. So I worked for Tigo in Tanzania, helped them launch their mobile money service, Tigo Pesa. And I know Barney, as part of the DFI team, he was one of my colleagues. I also worked for a payment service provider, Kifia, in Ethiopia. And then I've just come back from 13 months in Jordan, where I was working on a USAID project, which is around, it was looking to build capacity for micro and small enterprises. And I was part of the Access to Finance team, and then with specific specific expertise around the digital financial services side. And part of the work I was doing there was doing sort of DFS landscaping, as well as then looking at supporting microfinance institutions and the Microfinance Association, Tanmeer, looking at the opportunities around digital financial services more broadly. And so I finished a couple of end of February. I'm back in Malawi, doing some freelancing again, doing some work with UNCDF, and GIZ, and I'm actually going to be moving to Germany in about a month's time to do some work there as well.
Great. So, Chris, part of your, well, nice to meet you, Chris. Part of your of you certifying as a digital finance practitioner, you wrote a paper, the Jordan DFS landscape situation analysis, and you looked at whether the mandating of basic bank accounts by the Central Bank of Jordan to commercial banks will usher in strategic partnerships between banks, microfinance institutions, and payment service providers. Hopefully this paper will be available soon to the community, but I thought maybe as a way just to introduce the topic and what you worked on and what your feelings are around what's happening in Jordan is for you to give us a bit of a landscape of Jordan for those of the audience that have never been there. You know, what does digital finance look like in Jordan?
Okay, great. So yeah, I mean, I think as I said, one of the aspects I was doing there was actually doing a DFS landscape, which would then be open to the community, the DFS community practice in Jordan. And it's actually available on the USAID website there. And so let me give you that landscape now. And I used, if for those who are familiar, the UNCDF honeycomb model. So I'll just go through the honeycomb model, and then I'll talk into how I think this could be applicable with this new with the new mandate for zero balance bank accounts, which I think is quite a game changer. So first of all, looking at policy and regulation, there is a lot of support from the central bank. They have a national financial inclusion strategy. They actually have very low levels of financial inclusion, both regionally and globally at the moment, and they actually have the highest level of a female exclusion or the inequality gap. So they realize they have a big challenge, but there's a lot of work being done by the government, by the central bank to move this. So there's a lot of, from policy regulatory side, it's moving in the right direction. From infrastructure side, they have I would say it's a bit similar to the Indian model of having a very connected national payments system. So they have both on the ATMs, they have at the RTGS, they have for mobile payments, they have for bill payments. And certainly whenever you talk to people in Jordan about mobile payments now specifically, they'll just talk about JOMO Pay, and as Gavin said as well. And this is actually one of it's a strength, but it's also one of the weaknesses of why it's taking time for mobile payments to pick up in Jordan, because as you know, JOMO Pay is a platform. It's a platform which is essentially owned by the government, but it's marketed as a service. So people will say, oh, do you want to do a transfer through JOMO Pay as opposed to through Zain Cash or Dinarak or Mafazati, who are the service providers? So it's very much the government, the central bank is very much front and foremost, but this actually then creates challenges for the sector in itself. In terms of providers, there's three which are at a level of transactions. So there's Zain Cash, which is owned by Zain, the mobile operator. There's Dinarak, who are a privately funded payment service provider. And there's Mafazati, who are a consortium of 10, there's I think 6 banks, a microfinance institution, a mobile operator, a IT vendor, and an exchange house agent network. So it's actually a very interesting model that they have. Although the challenge for Mafazati is because there's so many different players and different shareholders, there's no one taking the lead. In terms of distribution and agent network, it's weak, and this actually then causes other problems, which I'll come on to shortly. There's very little, very small margins that the payment service providers currently make. And so with the payment service providers making very small margins, there's very little commission or motivation for being a mobile money agent. You know, if you're going to invest $1,000, let's say, you're making sense on that. You're making a couple of dollars. It's not, say, like in some of the African countries, for example, where you can make a decent return by being an agent. It's just not there. There's just not the financial model at the moment is just not there to to make it worthwhile being an agent. So with that as the case, the agents who are there, ironically, are what's called exchange houses. So they do essentially over-the-counter remittance, say from the north or to the south of the country, or even cross-border. And of course, these are also direct competitors to the service providers. So the key agents are also direct competitors. And again, which just makes the whole system sort of gets, should we say, compressed, or it makes it very difficult to get everything starting to move. When you're looking at high volume transactions, not many. The main use case is a bill payment, and this then also has other challenges around it as well. So for personal, very little in terms of mobile transfers. And you have a competitor service through these exchange houses, which is over-the-counter transfers. And again, Jordan, especially not just within the region, but I think certainly when you look at other countries as well, it's a fairly small, compact country. It's safe. You don't really have rural areas as such, because the rural areas are desert. So most of the most of the traffic, or most of the population will live on in and around highways. So you don't really have that P2P use case as before. Airtime, again, there's not a strong use case there. In Jordan, most people will buy a monthly bundle. So it's not like, say, in Malawi, where I am now, where you buy whatever, $1 a day or $2 a day, and you do that on a very regular basis. No, in Jordan, they very much on monthly bundles. So that use case is not there. And then they said on the bill payment, that's a fairly, there is bill payment, electronic bill payment, but it uses a over-the-counter model. There's also a challenge, more especially from a digital financial services, differentiating that from over-the-counter, in that the bill payment service was put out on tender from the central bank. So the central bank in Jordan doesn't only act as a regulator, doesn't only act as a sort of the custodian of the Jomo Pay platform, but in effect is also a service provider. And for fairly good political reasons, they want to make the charges as low as possible for the customer. And so the way that they have the model there, whilst at the same time not wanting to reduce their own revenue, so they have a very small fee for the customer to use the bill payment service over the counter, which leaves absolutely zero margin for the payment service providers. And so there is an aggregator who is a bill payment aggregator called Ifatelecom, and they take a small margin. And literally, if you're a payment service provider, if you want to provide that service of bill payment through your app, it's actually loss making by the time you've paid an agent for cash in, and then whatever small margin you get on the service. So the main use case is a loss maker for the payment service providers because of this challenge around ownership or running of the service for bill payments. And then this leads into customers. Customer numbers are still very low. I think in total there's about 450,000, which is about 10% of adult population. But of those, probably only 20% are 30 days active. And majority of those will be on bill payment, which is the loss maker for the service providers. So you put all of these things together. Yes, there's policy. Yes, there's regulation. Yes, there's infrastructure. But no, it doesn't really make much of a business case to be a service provider, unfortunately. No, there isn't an agent network. No, there aren't really many high volume use cases. And no, there aren't really many customers, because what is the value proposition to be a customer? It's a very cash-based society, and as of yet, they don't see that value proposition to make that behavior change. So that's just a brief overview of the landscape. In terms then of where are there some opportunities? Because honestly, at the moment, and I forgot to say, so there's 3 service providers who've got any sort of scale. There's another 2 who are licensed, but have got literally 0 scale. and there's another 4 who are in the process of application. So maybe they've actually either been approved or not since I left 6 weeks or so ago. So you've got an increasing number of service providers coming into the market, which just doesn't exist essentially as it is of today. So there needs to be some sort of new model, new value propositions to bring customers on board. And I see that, and I said, and up until today, recently, banks were not in. Banks are not interested in the, let's say, bottom of the pyramid type customers because they're high margin, low volume business model. You have microfinance institutions who cannot take deposits in Jordan, and I think that's fairly similar for much of the Middle East and North African region, and that would have been potentially a good use case, but they do want credit. And then you got payment service providers who just don't have the customer numbers, don't have the volume transactions, they have a low margin business. So you've got these 3 entities who have very different business models in every shape or form. But now the central bank has stepped in and saying, banks, you need to start accepting low value customers. And so how do they do that? So does it make sense to somehow link these 3 actors together, where the banks provide an account where you can take deposits, which the MFIs can't, and the PSPs, let's say it's a store of value as opposed to a deposit, and leading into financial inclusion. So could the microfinance institutions, who they have about 60 to 70% of their branches are outside of the main cities, could they act as hubs, and then you have agents as their spokes of the PSPs, and the MFIs are helping on the sort of liquidity management, helping to provide the agents who are also kind of their target markets, or those micro, small enterprises, to be agents, and the MFIs provide liquidity. The PSPs become the channel to mobilize deposits for the bank. The banks aren't really interested from a credit perspective to these customers, but the MFIs are. So you kind of got one customer who would be interacting potentially with 3 different types of financial service providers, but each of them having their own role to play. And then the question is, how can you get these 3 to sit in the same room and actually come up with that model where it works? And there actually is one company which is actually doing this. So there's a Jordan Ali Bank, who are a large commercial bank. They have a subsidiary called Ali Microfinance Bank, and they were at least in the process of going for a license to become a PSP as well. So I think they see there's that opportunity of, from the financially included to the microfinance, then graduate into the bank over time, and all the different parts of their business, very much playing to their specific strengths and within their specific mandate of what they're meant to be doing. So yeah, I think that's I would say Jordan is a very complicated situation, because it's kind of neither mobile led, it's neither bank led. It's kind of a combination of everything. They've gone for having that real strong integration at the beginning, which is great when it's there sometime down the line, like we're now seeing in various African countries and elsewhere. But it then means the building up the business case and getting competitive advantages as a payment service provider becomes very difficult in the short term. So I think if you had to ask me where would Jordan be in 5-10 years time, I think it'll be in a good position. But I think it's going to be very, very difficult for them to get there, because building up those business cases are very difficult. And so that's why I think there has to be innovation in partnerships. Otherwise, for certain, some of the PSPs, they won't exist. I mean, it's just financially impossible for them. I think also the way that it's going, some of the MFIs will either consolidate or merge, and or merge with commercial banks. So I have a feeling that kind of what we're talking about of the graduation from PSP to MFI to commercial banks would happen anyway. But it's, certainly one or two discussions I had just before leaving was, rather than waiting for that to organically happen, you need to be, whether you're a bank, a PSP, or an MFI, you need to be kind of in charge and planning it rather than waiting for it to happen.
Chris, I mean, thank you for that that overview. It does actually sound quite complex, and I mean, one of the things that surprised me in your paper and in an answer to one of Fahad's questions on the percentage of financial inclusion or financial inclusion ratio, I was surprised in your paper to see only 33% financially included and a target of only 42%. I thought really that there would be a much higher financial inclusion ratio. And then, a question from everything that you're describing there, it sounds like they're struggling to find the use case. Is there an obvious use case in your mind that will lead to financial inclusion? It's almost as if, there is no need. Why do we, why should anybody bother? It sounds like they've tried everything, and is there an obvious use case from your perspective? And then I'm going to unmute Fahad to ask some of his questions.
Okay, so to answer your first question, in terms of the current levels of financial inclusion, these figures were taken from the National Financial Inclusion Strategy, which was in 2017. There was, as you know, there was Findex 2017 as well. And if you look at the Findex numbers versus what's in the National Financial Inclusion Strategy figures, then the Findex figures are quite a lot higher. I think they're about 10% higher. So according to Findex, the National Financial Inclusion Strategy target for 2020 has already been met. But I think certainly when I was doing other work and/or talking with, say, the Microfinance Association, they always said use the National Financial Inclusion Strategy figures. We have more trust in them. Actually, that's what they said, because it comes from a bigger pool of players. There's probably a slightly more intensive way of collecting the data as well. So yeah, I mean, I think that would be one thing, is to say that what's in the National Financial Inclusion figures versus their targets versus Findex 2017, there's quite a big discrepancy there. But certainly from in Jordan, they always say use the National Financial Inclusion Strategy figures. So that's one. In terms of the use case, I mean, to be honest, I think the use case is deposits. The challenge is that the MFIs, because of regulation, don't take deposits. And so that's where I think that, it's interesting with the banks now being mandated to take, to open zero balance accounts with lighter KYC. This could be the way to do it. But the challenge there is the banks themselves, they're being mandated to do it rather than that it's a natural business fit for them. So yeah, it's a challenge. It's almost trying to fit a circle into a square. And that's why I think there needs to be some innovation. I don't think in the short term MFIs will take deposits. It was only last year that they got regulated by the central bank. So I think the central bank wants to make sure that the supervision on credit is very secure first. That's going to take a few years, and then maybe later, once they've got that confidence in the microfinance sector, then maybe they might think of deposits. And I think this is kind of maybe what's the mandating with the banks is a bit of a stopgap. I think also there was a very forceful lady, Maha Bahu, who was leading Jomo Pay beforehand and still is to a certain extent. And I think there was almost a sort of conversation behind closed doors. Is do MFIs need to take deposits if they can have a sort of value? So yeah, I think there's been a lot of discussions behind closed doors, which obviously I'm not being privy to. But yeah, I think there's somehow trying to push for deposits in one way, shape, or form. But at the moment, it's not the fit that you would naturally assume of having a deposit-taking microfinance institution, because they're the ones who've got the reach, who've got the client base, who know how to interact, who know the communication messages, etc., etc., etc.
So let me get Fahad to ask his questions on government payments, corporate payments, and cryptocurrencies, and then I see that we also got a couple questions coming from Ashraful on recent initiatives within Bangladesh. And then I'd like to come through to Rashid to say, in Bangladesh, after these gentlemen have spoken, in Bangladesh, how have they handled deposit taking in microfinance institutions, to see if there's any crossover. But let's start with Fahad. Fahad, if your questions are still unanswered on government payments, corporate payments, and cryptocurrencies, go for it.
Okay, so thanks, Chris, for the session, detailed analysis of Jordan DFS space. I think I would like to ask about if the government has tried to digitize the corporate and government cycle of payments. This is one question, and the other question is, have you as a consultant have asked people, normal people, that what financial inclusion means to them, what coming from their end? So it becomes because at the end the customer will be, if he or she is using the account, then they become financially included. By force, it will only be just a formal thing. So these are two questions, and the other question is, do you see any role of cryptocurrencies to improve financial inclusion in Jordan?
Okay, so a couple of questions there. So let me try to go through one by one. In terms of corporate or government payments, certainly from a policy perspective, there was a target to have all P2G payments being digital by end of last year, and all G2P payments by end of this year. I think they were very aggressive targets, and I think there's movement in the right direction, if not there yet. There's quite a number recently, as you know, Jordan has a very large Syrian population. And I think there's a question also on refugees. So I think that there is some movement that way, but I would be honest, I would say the challenge is that under the current pricing mechanisms, where there's not a sufficient commission for agents, if you're going to lose money on a small amount of transactions, you're going to lose a bigger amount of money on a large amount of transactions. And I think that there's one company, Dinarec, who I would say they are more donor sensitive, or they're kind of their route to market to scale has been more to go for to be involved in donor related projects. I think Zain Cash as Zain, they very much they kind of, I think they are in the market because they have to be, as opposed to necessarily seeing the big advantage. And I think the Mafazati, they see that there should be opportunity if they come together as a consortium. They've just not worked out how to be a successful consortium. They're always expecting somebody else to take the reins. So the simple answer is there has been some movement, but I think it's very, very little in terms of, certainly in corporate, somewhat more in government, but still fairly low. In terms of in financial inclusion, yeah, I mean, possibly where there's a difference between the National Financial Inclusion Strategy numbers and the Findex could be around registration of PSPs as opposed to active usage. So again, I would say registration is about 10% of population. Active usage is probably, I don't know, 1%, 2% of population. And so this kind of somehow is not so far away from the difference between the NFIS and the Findex score. So that could be where the difference is. In terms of people who consider themselves financially included or not, yeah, I mean, I think that's something where something ideally would be done would be kind of like as a FinScope would be great, if a FinScope or something similar was done in Jordan. I don't think there's any plans at the moment for that to happen, but I think something like that would really help a lot, and that was part of the reason for doing the DFS landscape and simultaneously a small research on micro small enterprise use of awareness and usage of digital financial services as well, because that fitted in with the project on the one side, and also trying to see if there were some use cases or opportunities for micro businesses to become agents. In terms of cryptocurrency, in terms of cryptocurrency, I know there have been one or two moves on that. Again, it's not my area of expertise. I know certainly in terms of blockchain, rather than cryptocurrency as the currency, they're looking at digital identities for some of the Syrian refugees. So there's one of the largest microfinance institution is called Microfund for Women, and they are working with a couple of blockchain businesses and I think one or two refugee agencies to look at. So if some of the Syrians go back home, they then have a common. There's an identity which can be followed up, so at least to make sure get loan repayments. I think it's still at a pilot stage, but it is. I think I would say Jordan from a standpoint of trying to be in front of the curve is always there, but it's almost kind of moving too fast for the service providers to catch up. And I saw some questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you so much.
Chris, let's move to Ashraful Alam. Let me unmute you. There we go. Hi. Do you want to ask your question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Yeah. So basically, my question was to the Jordan related presentation. First, as I know that from last few years, Jordan has been taking a lot of initiatives, especially the Jordan Central Bank has taken a number of initiatives in promoting DFS. They have also established one DFS council, which is basically a public-private partnership model. And under the new initiative, they have already issued the National Financial Inclusion Strategy, and they have they have already established very I would say very high target in terms of DFS areas. So my question was, what are the other initiatives in terms of the DFS? In terms of DFS, I mean, I heard that from the presentation that price is an issue, but my question is, what is the demand for digital financial services in Jordan? In general, apart from there are refugee program in Jordan, and I have seen that the Jordan refugee finance program is one of the renowned one in the Middle East as well as in other countries. So basically, what other, in terms of demand, what is the demand in general for most of the use cases like P2P transfer, money transfer, inland money transfer from one place to the other, then the G2P payment or person to government payment or business to business payment. What is the general demand for digital financial services in Jordan? That was my question.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think you picked up on some of this. So yeah, there's the Digital Financial Council, and also there's which is also under the council. They do digital forums, which is a bit more of a networking event, and I actually presented something similar just before I left. They also have a regulatory sandbox for fintech. They signed Maya Declaration in 2016, which has the same targets as National Financial Inclusion Strategy. They've been doing quite a lot of work in terms of international remittances. And I think probably a key one in terms of financial inclusion broadly rather than digital financial services is going through the whole regulation and licensing of microfinance institutions. So I think they're doing a lot. I can't fault them on that side. The problem is, and this is what it comes down to, is are there the use cases, and if not, what is the business case to be a service provider? And so the central bank can do all the right things, which I think generally speaking, and they are doing good stuff in policy and regulation. But at the moment, if you have a very they have fairly flat pricing, so it's not tiered pricing like say an M-Pesa. It's not even on a direct percentage pricing like in elsewhere. It's flat and it's low and it's low margin, and it's there's only so much you can do. I mean, if you've got low margins, it's difficult to go out and to build an agent network. It's difficult to go out and spend money on marketing to go for that change behavior. It's just a tough place to be a private sector service provider, no matter if the policy is there, no matter if the regulation is there. It's at the end of the day, these are businesses and they're trying to make money, and it's difficult because you don't have those main use cases that kind of propel have propelled service providers in our countries. So at least get up to some sort of mass, at least covers a chunk of operational costs. It doesn't exist at the moment. This is where it's challenging. I think if there are some of these partnerships, especially with commercial banks, then maybe they can take a longer view. They can make that investment. They can say that, okay, well, it's going to be 5, 6, 7 years to break even. We see this as a long-term investment, and we can do that. Otherwise, yes, it's a tough environment.
Chris, we've got 2 more questions for you, one from Maxime and one from Said. Maxime, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you, Gavin. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Chris, for the presentation you made. I have a question about the regulation in Jordan concerning the MFI, because you explained that the regulation does not allow MFI to collect deposit. I did not clearly understand that aspect. Why the regulation do not allow MFI to collect deposit? Thank you.
Okay. I had that question probably 1,000 times for the 1 year I was in Jordan. Every time I'm having a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or something a bit stronger, I was asking the same questions. Why are they not allowing deposits? Because I think that could be the key case. I think being a little bit more serious, I think probably the reason why that is they've only just like literally 6 months ago or this time last year started to license the MFIs for credit. So I think they're trying to build up that supervision capacity within the central bank on the credit side, and maybe in a few years' time, maybe then they will look for MFIs to become deposit taking as well. And so I think that's why kind of almost in the short term, they've said, okay, banks, you need to be able to accept these low value accounts or zero balance accounts. PSP is another alternative to take deposits. But yeah, I mean, I think my answer is I'm not sure why they don't have it now, because I think it would radically change the market. But I think probably it's because they've only just started the licensing. They want to get that supervision strong, and maybe in a couple of years' time, then they'll revisit. So maybe in the next National Financial Inclusion Strategy 2020 to 2024, 25, maybe then they will be more open. Because in terms of that, there was a diagnostic which made a very strong case to have deposits, and which the National Financial Inclusion Strategy was based on. But even though in the diagnostic it was proposing to have deposit-taking MFIs, they still didn't. So yeah, I think it's just a question of increasing supervisory capacity.
Chris, one more question from Saeed Hashim Ali. And then if I could ask, we're going to move to Rashid in Bangladesh, but if I could ask you to hang around and answer some of the questions in the chat box as they come up. I see there's already one from Fahad, but do continue asking your questions to Chris in the chat box, and Chris can answer them while we talk through Bangladesh. But last question, Saeed.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Thank you, Chris, for the insightful journey over the Jordanian DFS scenario. So I had a couple of questions for that matter. So first was if you see at the uptake and then you see the challenges that they have is the commission or the output of being a retailer for a DFS player in Jordan. So if there are such challenges, so can we have they thought about or have you proposed them to opt for a model which was practically implemented in Pakistan for that matter, which actually started off with accepting bill payments and then they step by step enabled over-the-counter transactions for money remittance and all that stuff. So which actually engaged the retail base. And they offered actually these transactions offered some commission to the retailers to be engaged to that to the DFS ecosystem, and now they are moving towards removing the over the counter transactions and converting all those users who actually were not part of the this ecosystem to mobile wallets now. And the second I'd say is on the financial literacy part of it, because most of the players or the markets, they lack initiatives on financial literacy. Like we would see hundreds and thousands of products offered by DFS players in multiple markets, but very low focus on financial literacy of as you say use cases. So use case not being available is I think for me, like I may be correct me if I'm wrong, one reason for not knowing the use case of DFS is not knowing how to use the facilities available, or like how to best use my finances. So I'd like your advice on this, or like your take on this, please.
Yeah, sure. So again, I think that and something which I think Jordan is doing quite well is stay on financial literacy. They've now actually included financial literacy as part of their core education program. So if you're at secondary school, then you have some financial literacy lessons. And also just a couple of months ago, they launched the digital financial services financial literacy strategy, which I think there were about 25 different stakeholders. So some private sector, some public, some NGO, and they each had their targets to reach. And the idea there was that there's a common set of materials which can also be customized for each of the parties. So whether they're an NGO, an MFI, business, government, but the core messages would stay the same. So I think from a financial literacy perspective, Jordan is moving in the right direction. So I think that's good. In terms of the agents and bill payments specifically, I think, if I could go in there with a white sheet of paper, I think what I would suggest is, first of all, they need to change the revenue model. So at the moment, it's not the bill, the utilities, let's say, they're not paying a collection fee. So it's not say, okay, our operations are going to be that much more efficient, so we will give 3% to various companies who can help us collect these payments. No, they say we want to have 100% of the bill, and then we'll charge a fee on top of that. And so this is where there's so little money around, because as a government, they don't want to make that fee extra too high to discourage people paying their bills. So it's actually the bill payment model itself which is the challenge. And then I said the central bank put this out on an exclusive tender to one company who's not they're PSP, I guess. They're more of a fintech company as opposed to a payment service provider company. And so if you're a PSP, you have to, whatever fee there is, it gets split 4 ways. So you get split to the Ether.com, it gets split to Jomo Pay. So every transaction that goes through Jomo Pay, there's a fee. Then there's some commission to an agent for any cash in, and then they get whatever's left over, which is just very little. And so they actually lose money on every transaction. So yeah, I would absolutely agree with you that previously I worked in Ethiopia, and there's a payment service provider there, Kafir, and they had a similar, they had a exclusive tender for utility payments, but it was on a, they had a collection commission, and they started on over the counter, and now they're moving towards mobile. I said Jordan is trying to take 2 steps forward, but it's almost 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, because the steps forward are killing the business case to be a service provider. I think that's where the kind of the challenge is. So, as I said, I think Jordan in 10 years' time, if they can figure out all of these challenges, they're putting a really strong foundation. But it's just making it very difficult to be in the private sector, to be a service provider at the moment, because as I said, it's not, the environment is enabling, but it's not business enabling.
Right. Chris, thank you so much for your time, and please do continue answering questions for us in the chat box there. We look forward to sharing your paper through our various media, and we really look forward to issuing your certificate saying that you're a certified digital finance practitioner. Thank you so much for your time today.
Okay, thank you very much.
Chris, also, if you feel comfortable doing so, leave your contact details in the chat box for anyone to contact you. I know that you're a consultant in this space, and a valuable one at that.
Sure, and what I'll do is I know just finalising the paper for the certificate, but as I mentioned, I did this study for Jordan, which it has some similarities, but I think it's probably a bit more in detail on some other things as well. So I'll put the link into the text box now as well.
Great, good stuff. Great, let's move. Thanks, Chris. Let's move to Rashid. Rashid has joined me here in Cape Town. He from Bangladesh, and also one of our community of practice facilitators. So hence visits to Cape Town, because we have them in, we have the group of them in Cape Town at a conference. Welcome. Rashid, maybe just start with giving those on the call a little bit of background to who you are and what you're currently doing.
I am Rashid. I am in the central bank in the position of joint director. I am responsible for AML CFT supervision of the digital financial service since 2012, and I am now in the CDFP journey, and I worked in the focus group on digital financial services and also financial inclusion global initiative, as well as focus group on digital fiat currency of ITU. Three of the focus group is on the ITU. And in my country, actually, I am also working with the DFS community. We built a digital finance forum. Bangladesh is online group. I am working as a coordinator. We are trying to establish organization, formal organization in the same name. As well as I worked as AML safety supervision advisor. We have developed a study paper that is AML safety regulation for mobile money policy options for Bangladesh. I can show you this paper. It is available in the online. And regarding the study paper, actually, when we regulate the digital financial service, we understand that all the stakeholders understand little or not adequately understand the risk of our digital financial service, because it's a different segment, a different type of service than the banking. And traditionally, we regulate banks and the safety supervision. There are lots of compliance issues, but when we move to the digital financial space, it's entirely different. It's so we understand the limitations of all the stakeholders, and so we develop this study paper so that as regulator and service provider understand the risk, as well as how FATF recommendation can be implemented in digital financial service spaces. And we have issued a circular for mobile financial services based on our paper.
Good. And so also for our benefit, so I'm pleased to meet you. I'm sure the group is pleased to meet you, but also for the group's benefit, maybe Rashid, you can give us a bit of a picture of the current financial inclusion landscape in Bangladesh.
So thank you, Gavin. Before talking to financial inclusion landscape in Bangladesh, I want to talk something about my country, because some of our facilitators who are joining is asking me some of the questions. So I think I should introduce my country also. Bangladesh is a small country, is 147,000 square kilometer in South Asia nation, and but our population is more than 160 million population. Second densely populated country after the Singapore, and our GDP growth rate is currently about 8%. 8%. And per capita income is $1,900 US in estimated in this year. So our one of the fastest growing economy in the country, in the world. And regarding the financial inclusion landscape, first we have to say about the microfinance. Bangladesh is the birthplace of microfinance, you know. And there is about 783 registered microfinance institutions in Bangladesh now. We have separate regulatory agency, microcredit regulatory agency, and there are both savings and credit product offered by the microfinance institution in Bangladesh. Savings in the form of monthly installment, not the fixed deposit, and you know, more than 90% customer of the microcredit institutions is women. So there is a great things for financial inclusion. And if we go, then I will talk about the mobile financial service in Bangladesh. It's started operation in 2011. In this month, in February, the total number of mobile money account is 67 million, quite a large number, and 50% of the mobile money account is active, that is used in within the last 3 months, and number of agent is 0.9 million. It's, in most of the countries, there are people have access to the mobile money, and daily average number of transaction is 7 million, and average value of transaction, about size of the transaction is $19. So it is one of the space where it is contributing to the inclusion, digital financial inclusion in Bangladesh. And the new area is agent banking, agency banking. In the new spaces, we in 2013 we started licensing agent banking operations in Bangladesh. In this case, the bank contract with the independent individuals or say small organizations or businessmen to operate exclusive agency service on behalf of the banks. And total agent outlet now is 9,000. Not so big, but it's a banking service, not the MF service, because full-fledged limited banking service is offered in these outlets. And total banks, 19 banks is offering now agency banking. And we see, and there is total 2.4 million agent banking accounts currently have. And currently also we are seeing that banks are partnering with the mobile money, mobile MNOs for offering agency banking services. So we have found a great opportunity for providing full-fledged banking services through the agency banking. Because when we think about the branch banking, these are the cost is high, and a small balance transaction through the bank branches is not so much business cases for the banks. But when we look to the agency banking, a small shops are operating as the agency banking, and it is a win-win situation for both the agents and the bank, because bank is not providing any money for establishing the agent outlets. Agent is getting money for the transaction, for the deposits they collected. So there is business driving force for them to collect a deposit from the local communities. So for this reason, we see great potential to provide all kinds of banking service to the agent. And other thing is that there is about 10 million no-frill account open to provide agricultural subsidy as well as social service benefits in Bangladesh. And now we are in the National Financial Inclusion Strategy in the final stage now. Hopefully in this year we will publish these documents, and all the stakeholders will work to implement the financial inclusion strategy.
Okay, so I think that also answers Karim's questions around measures undertaken by the central bank of Bangladesh in promoting digital financial services. But is there anything specific you want to call out on measures from the central bank?
So this year, in 2018, we have issued a new regulations for mobile money, and previously only banks are allowed. Now banks can partner with other organizations to offer mobile financial services. And other thing is that we are also allowing banking booth. That's mean a bank can open a small booth or 1 or 2 person to collect deposit and also provide banking service. I think it will be popular. And also we are issuing PSP licenses, new PSP licenses, and those are mostly non-banks. So I think this will be affect the market.
Sorry if I missed it earlier, Rashid. What is the financial inclusion percentage in Bangladesh?
As per index, it is 50% people have bank accounts.
50, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Does that include mobile money?
Yes, in the question I have seen it's including mobile money. But if you consider mobile money accounts, that is a huge number of accounts. That is about 67 million mobile money account, and also microfinance customer is also there is microfinance customer is 30 million. 30 million. So if you consider both the two ratios, so I am not sure how Findex is saying that it's 50%. I think more than that. Maybe whether they included the microfinance account, I don't know.
Yeah.
But they are formal organizations regulated by our microfinance regulatory authority.
Yeah.
So we consider all the components. I think it will be more than that.
Very interesting to see the contrast with Jordan, which has a 33% included in a target of 42%. So it's quite fascinating to see these two different poles, but very different dynamics in each of those markets from even from a GDP per capita perspective. So what is different? We heard about the deposit-taking challenges in Jordan for MFIs. What is different in Bangladesh? Are MFIs able to take deposits?
Yes. Currently, most of the credit provided by the MFI is coming from the deposit of the clients.
Okay.
They can collect a deposit. If you want to be a customer of the MFIs, you have to, a weekly deposit. Is a small value weekly deposit savings account, and after a certain time you will get the credit. And other is fascinating thing in my country is that most of the non-profit organization is providing credit licenses as the microfinance institutions, and it is important for sustainability because non-profit organization is not they cannot take profit from their organizations by law. So whenever they are earning from the MFI their credit operations, that is rolling within the organizations. They cannot offer dividend for their shareholders, and for non-profit there is no shareholder actually. So for this reason, you see the BRAC NGO, one of the largest NGO in the world, and they have bank, they have Bikash, they have other business organizations because shareholder can't take the deposit. So it's one of the reasons where the sustainability of the microfinance institution in Bangladesh, and it's globally different. In other country, commercial organization is providing microfinance in the market, and they are shareholding, and their shareholding have some demands for higher dividends, and so we have in India, in Andhra state, that there is credit problem. But in Bangladesh, you say we are providing microcredit for several years, and we have not seen any credit problem in the country for this reason.
Just responding to students here. So that is interesting. So to what degree what you're describing creates a healthy ecosystem. We've started changing the definition of financial inclusion around the world away from access and towards healthy use of financial services and a broad range of financial services. And what you're describing there is a healthier ecosystem. Let me quickly go to the two questions that have come up from the audience before I go on to the debate that we have in the classroom on OTC transactions and whether or not they're good. So let me first get Maxime. I think you're still able to talk. Maxime, you want to ask your questions on digital ID, and then we'll come back to Said.
Yes, thank you, Gavin. Thank you, Rashid. My question is this: since the digital ID is actually the foundation of a digital economy, I would like to know if the government of Bangladesh have carried out a kind of digital ID system. Did they put in place, like in India, a unique ID digital authority? Thank you.
In my country, in 2008-9, we have registered all the adult citizens in the ID system. This ID system, we have fingerprint and we have a ID scan also. So already we have this basic ID system, foundational ID. And we have about 140 million mobile SIM. Those are registered from the national ID system and biometric registered. Now we are working on the eKYC for mobile financial service, so that all mobile financial service account is registered for the biometric identification and authentication actually. So actually, and currently our election commission is responsible for ID systems. And the election commission is providing a smart ID system where there is chip and there is multiple field where we can put data on the system. So actually we are moving to the digital ID system now.
Great. Said, your question about the gender gap.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rashid. It's heartening to see, after Jordan's scenario, it's heartening to see that something interesting is happening in Bangladesh, and there's a lot to learn from this model. But since we belong from the same region, and there's always a big challenge of gender gap when we talk about financial inclusion in the subcontinent, for that matter, like for India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, since they are more or like the same societies. So I'd like to learn about the initiatives undertaken by the central bank of the Bangladesh Bank to eradicate or minimize these the gap, and what do you advise what are the initiatives that has been specifically taken for this?
Previously in microfinance institution, what I have talked that 90% of the customer is the women. If we can include digital microfinance institution in the digital spaces, or we can include to provide digital financial product, then I think we can we can reduce the gender gaps in Bangladesh, as well as we are now trying to promote the female agent, mobile money agent, and mobile money agent, so that they can visit door to door and to provide mobile money services. And when the agent banking is getting popular, and if the agent banking outlets go to the near to the home of their rural villages, and I think female can better able to visit the agent outlets and to make a deposit or taking other services from the agency outlets. I think that will be a great thing. But as India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, you know that women, when you go outside of the home, it is a little bit harder for them to go outside, and because they have some family responsibilities and look after their family. So actually, agent banking and the female agent of mobile money can help us, and if we engage MFI, that will be a great thing for financial inclusion of the women.
Yeah. Chris, your question is linked to OTC, and so is mine. So can I ask Jimmy to ask his question first before we go to you, Chris Wolf? Jimmy, your question on how to get to 9,000 banking agents?
Thank you, Gab. That's the question. We're just wondering here, as we follow you, congratulations, Rashid, and colleague. We're so proud of you, and we're just following on. We're just wondering these very interesting numbers, 900K,
9,000. Yeah, 9,000.
How did you
every for setting up any agency, the bank have to apply to central bank, and we give licenses for opening the agency outlet by the banks. So the bank, we have a specific regulation for the eligibility criteria of the agent banking. In this way, we are bank are getting profitable, seeing it profitable, and they are opening agency outlets, and we are central bank is encouraging them to offer these services. And it's what I have said earlier. It's a win-win situation for the agent, both the agent and the banks. So it's certainly will boost, and we will see that it will increase very rapidly. But what is important that it is a full-fledged banking service. For this reason, central bank is not so much liberal about like the micro mobile money.
Mobile money agents.
Yeah, it's in individual cases for every agent you are setting, you have to get license from central bank.
And what's the key difference between when we say full-fledged? What is the key product difference that
you can open bank account?
Okay.
You can deposit in this account. You can take a remittance from this outlet. You can apply for loans, and you can take disbursement of loans from this account. So all these services. And if you move to the and what is security issue? There's fingerprint is used for making transaction. That means you don't need to write a passbook or check. Just a fingerprint is the authentication method. So poor people easily can access to the agency banking outlet. And if you go, the same customer can avail other banking service in the banks. There is certain transaction limits in the agency banking outlet. But if you go to the bank branches, you can take more. If you need more transaction limit, or you can send more money, then you can visit to the bank branches. So actually, and for AML CFT plus P2, we are not actually very much worried about the authentication and identification as in banking. We are not getting more complaint.
Okay, so full extension. Full extension of a bank as opposed to more of a payments deposit in and out. So Chris Statham is just a request for you to add your contact details if you're comfortable doing that. Chris Wolf.
Hi, yes, if you can hear, I just wanted to clarify the 67 million, was that mobile money users or accounts? My understanding was that in Bangladesh, the majority was over the counter and people weren't necessarily opening mobile money wallets. So I'd love the clarification, please.
Chris, it is the number of mobile money account already opened in the different provider, and we'll talk about the OTC in the later part of this discussion. So
yeah, so I mean, maybe Chris, does that answer your question? It is the mobile money accounts. It's not the users.
That's exciting. And then, yeah, when you get to the OTC pieces, hearing the depth of financial products people take advantage of would be very interesting.
Yeah, so let's get into that OTC now. So, I mean, linked to that question, and we covered the OTC model in two of the courses, leading markets and in mobile money operations. And in both of those, we see OTC as something that was either intentional or unintentional, but led to mass adoption of mobile financial services into markets, Pakistan and Bangladesh, and is behind now a big and growing success story in Africa. But many would say that OTC is not financial inclusion because it doesn't lead to the end user actually having an account. What are your views on how this evolved in Bangladesh? And as Chris says, what is the usage of what is the offering that's behind the 67 million versus what they could do as cash-ins?
So currently, cash in and cash out is the dominant functions in mobile money. But if we look to the in 2013 to 2018, the P2P cash in, cash out, and P2P increased about 4.4 times in 2013 to 2018, in the same rate. And if you look at the P2P, cash in and cash out ratio is 2.4 times higher than the P2P. So we assume that there is lots of OTC in my market, and we cannot ignore the market reality. But we have to also go to the why people are using it, because there is certain use cases so that people are using it. The mobile money is in English. Most of the people in Bangladesh, don't understand English very well, and especially the poor population. And you have to complete the transaction within 90 seconds USD minimum, and you have to put the number, mobile number, money, and PIN in 90 seconds. And I think it's tough to them to complete the transaction. So people rely on the agents and give money and send money to the beneficiaries. And that is the one of the main causes why people use OTC. And other thing is that there is some business case also in terms of agent. When you in ideal scenario, what we expect, we will go to the agent and he will cash in my account. I will send P2P into my beneficiary, and he will cash out. But in ideal scenario, the total cost is higher than the OTC. I can explain. In cash in, I don't need to pay. In P2P, I have to pay 5 taka. For cash out, I have to pay 1.85%. Okay. So that if I send 10,000 taka, I have to pay 190 taka. My cost. But if you think otherwise, if I send OTC, if agent send money, make cash in not my account but the beneficiary account, direct deposit, the total cost will be 185 taka, because there is no charge of P2P 5 taka in USSD manner. So the cost is 185 taka. Okay. And if you send, there is other OTC method also. Agent can send money to the personal account of other agent. That means beneficiaries agent's personal account. Right. In that cases, the agent is getting charging 185 taka to the beneficiary, but he has no cost. And if as a sender and receiver in both sides, if the agents use their personal account for transaction, that means I give money to my agent and he send money to the personal account of the recipient beneficiary. Then the total cost is 5 taka for the agent for P2P, but he will charging 185 taka. So certainly, what we will do? I certainly will use OTC.
The incentives are in place.
Yeah, incentives are in place. But so in the market reality, we have to acknowledge, and what can we do? Yeah. We can. So firstly, I said the impact. What impact we have seen. Right. In case of AML safety perspective, we analyze thousands of cases related with mobile money, and in most of the cases, the anonymous transaction, I say not OTC, anonymous transaction is the main, is the root cause of the criminal abuse of mobile money. If we cannot identify the sender or recipient of the money, then he certainly continue to use it, because we cannot trace the recipient of the beneficiary of the criminal ill-gotten money. Right. So that is the AML safety perspective, and is the consumer trust perspective. When there is lots of fraud happening and we cannot identify the criminal, then the consumer do not rely on this mobile money, and they are just right this moment. Mobile money is a payment service, money transfer service.
Right.
So they are just giving money, and it is in other places, and they are withdrawing money. They are don't retaining money in their wallets,
right,
because of the consumer trust perspective. And if we go to the market conduct perspective, we in our regulation we have said that you cannot maintain more than one wallet in one provider in a service provider. One person can have one wallet in a provider.
Right.
But we have seen that the agents are maintaining multiple wallets in their name and sometimes in the name of their relatives. So actually, when we different provider compliance level is different. So who is not compliant,
right,
is giving extra incentive to their agents. So agents tend to giving service to the mobile money, but who is compliant? Incentive is low for the from the service from the provider. So the market situation when non-compliant can be a business strategy,
right,
made, and that is the challenge. So we have to combat OTC, combat anonymous transaction, and for MSCT perspective, I don't see any problem of allowing OTC, because if you have a proper identification, authentication, it can be happen. We can allow it.
I think that,
But at the same time, the fee for OTC should be higher than the P2P transaction, so that you allowing it for money transfer, domestic money transfer perspective, people are habituating in this area. But at the same time, you are discouraging it by charging higher.
Yeah. So
move to the account.
I think what you're saying makes sense, and then the incentives need to be in the right place in order for it to actually change the model in the market. We have Ashraf who had some contribution on Bangladesh to add. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Go for it. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Basically, there were a few questions regarding eKYC, gender gap, agents, and also lastly, Rashid was talking about. So, in terms of eKYC, yes, in Bangladesh, currently we do not have a formal eKYC guideline, but the infrastructure we have in Bangladesh is, tremendous. Bangladesh has more than 90 million adults populations ID in the national ID system, which is, and also around 70% of these are smart card. Chip-based smart card already distributed by the government, and government is planning to complete the distribution of smart card to all the adult population, 18 plus, basically 18 plus, who can vote in the national election. So this has already been utilized in authenticating the mobile ownership of the people in Bangladesh, but in terms of KYC, it has not been utilized that way still. Recently, from last year, basically, UNCDF and Bangladesh Bank, particularly Bangladesh Financial Intelligence Unit, where Rashid is basically working, and also the A2I, Access to Information, which is a basically, I would say, one of the biggest digital initiative of the government. We basically together took an initiative to basically start eKYC in Bangladesh, and under this initiative a draft guideline has already been drafted by the central bank. Now we are waiting for the national ID authorities consent to start piloting. So once the pilot will be run for 6 months and using the government safety net people who are receiving government safety net payments. So once the pilot is done, based on the pilot evaluation, the draft eKYC guideline will be finalized, and it will be issued for, all the financial institutions. So we are expecting basically a, major shift in customer onboarding in terms of KYC in Bangladesh once the pilot is done. The second issue was around gender gap. Yes, Bangladesh is one of the country where gender gap in terms of financial inclusion as well as DFS is one of the highest in the world as well. So there has been many reasons. I would say, if you review the DFS products in Bangladesh, major providers, because Rocket or Surecase, you will see there is not a single women-focused product. Basically, where the banks have many women-focused products for women entrepreneurs and women who are in the job, but the DFS providers not yet has come up with any, focused products for the women. Like women in the Bangladesh has one of the, largest population, women population working in the RMG sector, where they are basically actively involved in making transaction. They send money to their, parents back home in the village areas. And also they are day-to-day, they are utilizing finances, and they have, real use cases. But still now, there is no women-focused product. This is one reason that bottom of the pyramid people in general, have less, focus in the DFS market. Although we are talking about that this DFS will go through the, go into the bottom of the pyramid, but this is missing, still missing. We are missing the bottom of the pyramid in general. The current initiative that we are linking the DFS accounts, the mobile financial services account with the bank account, is basically benefiting the well-off segment of the society in Bangladesh. This is not, helping the bottom of the pyramid people in adopting, in accessing or in having uses in the DFS accounts. Another question was around the agents. Rashid has explained a lot. In Bangladesh, agent is basically two types of agent. One is master agent, we call it. Master agent is not exclusive. One institution can be master agent of several banks at a time. But outlet, service outlet must be exclusive. So one agent, like if I give an example, Duar Agency Banking, which is an agent of Ogruni Bank, one of the big largest government bank. Only one institution has more than 500 outlets throughout the country, and also the Union Digital Center under the A2I initiative. Bank Asia Limited is opening agency outlet in the digital Union Digital Center, and also under the A2I initiative, post offices. There are more than 8,000 post offices around the country. So these post offices are going to be the banking agent as well. And lastly, this is my personal evaluation of OTC. In Bangladesh, OTC is not, welcome legally. In terms of regulation, OTC is not allowed. But it was one of the largest, largest transaction volume segment of the mobile financial services. Although it was not welcome, not explicitly allowed to do, but in my opinion, OTC has basically given a huge push in terms of adoption of mobile, or at least the bottom of the pyramid people got to know that we can send money using mobile. So this has basically, it has given the initial push on mobile money transaction, which now is, paying off. Now people, government is, has, Bangladesh Bank has installed a restriction. Now you cannot send, money from an agent point using without giving your information. Like you have to put your name, your mobile number, even your your NID number as well. The agent needs to record those information, and so this way basically OTC in Bangladesh, I am seeing this is our I am currently in the UNCDF as a country project coordinator. We have done a number of research on women's gender gap in mobile financial services usage and in many others, MFI digitization. So we are seeing that in the rural areas, even in the bottom of the pyramid segment, who are currently working in the city areas like rickshaw puller, the small worker, small people working in the urban areas who basically uses mobile financial services to send back money to their village home. Gradually, they are basically coming on to the account-to-account transfer. Now they are basically they are seeing the benefit. Also, they have learned that they can use this. So gradually, the shift in the OTC is clearly visible. It is going down, and account usage is increasing. But my observation in Bangladesh that there is lack of attention specifically for the bottom of the pyramid people, and particularly for the women in the rural area, where Bangladesh needs to focus its initiative, its energy much more than what is right now. Thank you.
Okay, Ashraf, thanks. Thank you for a lot of validation to what Rashid is saying, and for those important additions. It sounds like we'll need to have a whole webinar for Bangladesh on itself to also get your inputs. I want to make sure that I can get back to some of the last student questions here. We've got 4 minutes left before they kick us out of the webinar. First of all, Candace, are you there to ask your question on?
Yeah, hi. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Okay, great. I'm dialing in from Tanzania, and my question related to the comment that I heard about direct deposit. So we consider direct deposit to be a regulatory offense in Tanzania because agents are supposed to validate KYC of the customer before doing a transaction. Therefore, in theory, they're supposed to only do a deposit. They should not be doing a direct deposit. So is that not a problem in Bangladesh?
Thank you. Actually, what I have said in previously, the ideal situation is what regulatory aspect. Direct deposit also a crime in Bangladesh, and any sender have to produce his ID card, an ID card, national ID card, while taking deposit or cash in or cash out. That is the regulatory requirement. But when you say that you make a direct deposit, how the agent we confirm that the person in front of him is taking cash in, or the cash in mainly made to the account of the beneficiary account. Actually, we have to invent some technology or process so that we can make sure that when you're making a cash in or cash out, the person in front of you is present here. So actually, we have to make some technological process innovation for this reason, because when it's not possible to go to each agent and check whether he made the cash in the customer who is in front of him. So that I think digital solution is the best way to monitor this problem.
Yeah, I agree. If I can just quickly touch on what Safaricom has done. So Safaricom does what is known as vicinity checks. So if the agent and the customer are not within the same cell ID, it actually rejects the transaction. So that is, I do agree that it has to be restricted technically.
And what is Safari? In case of Safaricom, here the telecom network as well, the MFS network. In my country, actually, bank or bank subsidiary is providing the services, so you do not have the information about the cell information. But so we have to need innovation in local context. Actually.
Yeah. Okay, I do understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's all we have time for. Any closing thoughts in our last minutes, Rashid? Otherwise, just to thank you very much for your time and for everyone else's time. Excellent set of questions and discussion on both Jordan and Bangladesh.
Thank you everyone who participated in this webinar, as well as the DFI for giving me the opportunity to talk to a large audience globally.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you, Chris, and everyone else. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.